One of Bolt Action's best features is that it allows big howitzers and anti-tank guns to be deployed on the table, meaning we get some really cool modeling opportunities. But if you are new to the hobby, or metal miniatures in general, you may finally get your cool artillery piece in the post and be confused. Trust me, it's easy to feel intimidated by a multi-piece metal miniature, but don't worry, we'll show you some tricks to help make the process as simple as possible. Let's start with some tools. The most important thing you'll need is super glue. Your normal Tamiya extra thin or other plastic cement just won't bond with metal, so make sure you've got some super glue on hand. There are hobby-specific super glues out there, but the kind you can find at your local hardware store works just as well. You'll also want a hobby knife and some clippers if you have them. Alright, now that we have our tools, let's take a look at one of these guns. How about this Australian 6-pounder? Let's open her up and check out all the pieces and clean them of any mold lines or extra metal flashing. Typically, if it doesn't look like it should be there, clip it away. Now that all our parts are cleaned up, where do we start? Doesn't look like this blister came with instructions. If your kit doesn't have instructions either, don't fret. Most of Warlord's gun kits have assembly instructions online. Just search the gun on Warlord's website. Ah, there's a 6-pounder. For any of these guns, I'd start with the axle, wheels, and stabilizer arms. Gluing these parts together is going to give us a solid foundation for the rest of the weapon. We'll glue the wheels to the axles first, but make sure that you always do a dry fit test before adding any glue. Here I'm using a thin version of super glue applied with a toothpick. Once the wheels are set, we'll add the stabilizer arms. With this kit, we could dry fit them into place, and all we have to do is make sure they are nice and level. If they aren't, don't be afraid to apply just a tiny bit of pressure to bend the metal parts to make them straight or level. Once everything looks good, just add your super glue. One of the nice things about this part of the build is that you can typically add a lot of extra super glue to make sure everything is really secure. Next, let's attach these small details to the gun. One is the gun sight, the other is possibly an elevation adjustment mechanism. By the time we wrap these details up, the chassis is dry and solid. Let's attach this front plate next. It's hard to tell from the instructions the angle this rests at, but we can look at some of the other kits for this gun that represents other theaters. This 8th Army version has a photo that looks like it's pretty much vertical. Finally, we can attach our gun shield to the gun and glue the gun down to the chassis. If you are ever in doubt, remember you can always add a little extra super glue to the joints to make sure they are nice and strong. Now that we have the gun built, let's talk about basing. First, I would definitely recommend gluing these metal artillery pieces to a base. The extra strength from the base will make sure the miniature you just spent all that time putting together, well, stays together. The crew of your gun, however, are also very important. Per the Bolt Action rules, each member of the crew needs to be within 2 inches of the gun breech and at least 1 inch from another crew member. With this ruling in mind, we have a few options for basing our crew. One method is to glue the crew directly to the base of the gun. This makes sure that your crew and gun is always in the same place, but when it comes to removing models for casualties, you'll have to use a dice or something similar to keep track. Also, some artillery pieces hang over the included base just a little bit, and this is totally fine. You can glue all the contact points and it will still be solid. But you can use a bigger base to keep it all within the base's perimeter. A larger base also gives you more hobby opportunities to add some scenery and make the unit look great. Just remember that a very large base can be a bit unwieldy on the table. Now let's get back to the crew. Another option is to put each soldier on their own base and place them around the gun. This makes removing casualties and optimally positioning your crew easy, but sometimes looks odd with bases stacked on bases. One workaround that I found helpful is to arrange the bases of the crew around the gun and trace them into the gun's base. This usually results in a semicircle shape. Next, cut out these shapes using a hobby knife or a rotary tool. This allows the crew to be placed next to the gun and be removed as casualties. The final option requires the most work, but is visually and functionally appealing. Magnetizing each crew member allows the base to look nice and natural, but also makes casualty removal super easy. I drilled a hole in the tab for each crew and their corresponding position on the base. Then I added a little bit of super glue and shoved the magnet in there. Now, once crew become casualties, you can remove them no problem. Any of these basing methods will work, so use whichever sounds best to you. So once you have your artillery piece built, it's time to paint. Don't forget to apply a layer of primer first, as this will also help the next layers of paint adhere better to the model. Most guns are a single color, so once you get the base coat on, you can paint the road wheels, dry brush some highlights, and add a little weathering, and of course, stick a tuft on there, which should leave you with something like this. So, with just a little bit of time and thought, you can have an artillery piece of your own ready for the tabletop. It's always great to get these iconic units on the table to wreak havoc on your enemies. You don't need to feel too intimidated by these kits either. It just takes a little bit of practice, and they'll look great on the battlefield.